Hi there. I'm Randy Patterson, a psychologist in clinical practice, and this is Psychology Salon, a channel about psychological issues. If you like this kind of thing, click subscribe below. This series of videos is about grief, as close as it comes to a universal human experience, and I've taken as my starting point the 4 tasks of mourning, as discussed by William Worden in his great book, Grief Counselling and Grief Therapy, which has been on my shelf for over 30 years. Worden talks about tasks rather than stages because stages imply a kind of universal sequence. And in human lives, these things are virtually never universal. The first task, discussed in my last video, is to accept the reality of the loss, to acknowledge that what has happened, and to develop a kind of emotional link to that reality. Initially, a loss can seem unreal, as though it hasn't really happened, and with time, the truth seems to sink in and take on shape and weight. We realize that we really are in a world that no longer holds the person we have lost. The second of Worden's tasks is to experience the pain of grief. So this doesn't sound like a fun video. And really, let's face it, it's not. Loss often brings with it powerful emotions, often more powerful than we have ever felt before. So powerful that they can trigger a kind of emotional circuit breaker, leaving us unable to feel much of anything, at least at first. But that doesn't tend to last, and eventually the feelings can come. I've been speaking about how certain beliefs can derail the process of grief and leave the person stuck. One of the beliefs that applies to this task is the idea that we simply cannot bear the intensity of these feelings. They're too strong and will just tear us apart or cause us to lose our sanity and our ability to cope forever. People routinely say, I have never felt anything like this before, certainly not this intensely. So how would I know I can survive it? And in a way, I suppose the answer is, you don't know. But buried beneath that question is an assumption, which is, you get a choice. Like someone giving birth thinking, I'm not sure I can handle the pain of this, so maybe I just won't give birth. Well, might not be up to you. When you have a close relationship with someone, it's as though there are 1,000 invisible threads joining you, and they're attached with little invisible hooks. As we go through grieving, it's as though those hooks are being pulled out of us one by one. Attachment to other human beings is one of the most basic elements of what we are as human beings. It's deep within us. It's not an intellectual thing. And the loss of that attachment produces extremely powerful motivation. Get it back, get them back. And in grief, we know that we can't do that. So it's a little bit like the strongest thirst you've ever had, and there's no longer any such thing as water. There is no way to get the relief that you seek. So those hooks keep getting pulled. Now, Worden frames the experience of the pain of grief as a task and implicitly an essential one. How important is it really that you feel miserable? And is that misery useful? The key here, I think, is avoidance. If the unhappiness is there and we just try to paper it over or stuff it into a closet, then it's likely to fester there. You can imagine yourself, if we locked you in a closet, what do you want to do? You're going to bang on that door to get out. And in a sense, that's what those feelings tend to do. They might come out in depression, in nightmares, in substance use, in all kinds of ways that have a negative impact on your life. Now, there's been some debate about this in the literature. What if we medicate somebody with an anti-anxiety medication or an antidepressant to the point that they feel, at a minimum, kind of numbed? Like Novocaine for somebody undergoing a dental procedure that otherwise would be painful. Maybe we can gloss over the pain with an artificial booster, and the healing process will take place in the background regardless. This is what we do for physical injuries, after all. We take painkillers when we're injured, and there's no assumption that having ibuprofen in our system will mean that we don't heal. But it seems that at least in some cases, we're using those medications in the service of avoidance, and avoidance is seldom an effective strategy for overcoming emotional experiences. This debate isn't really settled, but many of us in the clinical world get alarmed at the number of people who are prescribed antidepressant medication when what they are experiencing is a normal human reaction to loss. We usually use medications in an attempt to help people become normal, whatever that is. In this case, people might already be responding normally to loss, and we're using the medications to help people have an abnormal reaction. Now, to many of us, this doesn't seem helpful or advisable. Some people report that down the road, when they come off the medication, they find themselves back where they were when they started taking it. It didn't help them through the process. It just stopped the process, and it started back up again when it wasn't being suppressed. Now, again, the science on this isn't at all as clear as we'd like it to be. My bias is, where possible, for a person to experience normal grief and work through it rather than trying to block that experience. But we'd need more research to see if my bias is really correct. Certainly, William Worden seems to think that having the emotional experience of grief is important to the healing, and John Bowlby believed so too. All that said, it doesn't mean that a person has to avoid all help. Sometimes a person going through this can benefit from help to get a decent night's sleep. And some people are going through such profound pain that nothing is getting processed. They're just being tortured by it. And a medication may help moderate it to the point that they can begin dealing with it. So there's not much clear guidance from science, and there's not much that we can say on a blanket basis from any other stance either. It's really a case-by-case thing. Now, in saying all of this, I've been presuming that we've been talking about the loss of close attachment bonds. Many of us know a great many people, friends and family, and those bonds vary in strength. We might learn that our hiking buddy has died and be surprised that although this is a sad event, we aren't overwhelmed by it. Does this mean we should sit down and try to work ourselves up into a full grief reaction? No. We will feel this profound grief mainly with people to whom we are attached particularly strongly. There will be some friends and some relatives whose deaths we mark with not enormous emotion. Sometimes we're surprised by the depth of our feeling. Sometimes we're surprised by its lack. In both cases, the best approach seems to be to open ourselves to whatever it is that we're experiencing or not experiencing, and to view this with a kind of curiosity rather than judgment. Feeling that we should be feeling this or should not be feeling that seldom seems to help. It's like going to the beach. It's not a matter of what the waves should look like. It's how they do look. Oh, okay. And that image of waves is important. Early on, these waves of grief can be immense and overwhelming. And either it's more like a universal high tide of emotion, or it's a set of waves very close together. One passes and the next is upon you. Over time, two things may happen. First, the waves may or may not be quite as intense. And second, they may come somewhat less frequently. Probably the most common thing people say in this regard is that when they come, they're as intense as ever. But whereas you'd been getting 100 of them a day, now they're down to 10 a day. The frequency drops, but the intensity is just as great. And then, with time, the intensity on average may begin to ease up as well. Some people don't notice the change. I'm still crying every day. Yes, but twice a day, not 10 times like before. And what's the nature of that pain? Well, one aspect of it, obviously, is grief, a kind of intense longing or missing feeling and sadness, those hooks tugging at you. But that's not necessarily the only emotion. Sometimes it's regret. I wish I'd gone over there more often. You can put yourself on trial for every transgression, everything you wish you had done differently, as though you had a time machine and you can change it. But you don't. For a lot of people, self-forgiveness is a big part of the work. Acceptance. There's that word again. Allowing the truth to be the truth. This is what happened. That's the world that I'm in. And for a lot of people, one of the feelings that comes is anger. Often anger at the person you've lost. I was important and you smoked. Or you did that stupid thing and you got yourself killed. When someone close to us dies, we get injured and we can feel rage at the person who injured us. When someone ends their own life, the family often feels powerful anger at them. That's not something that happened. You did that. You chose nothing over me. And we might have all kinds of awareness about mental illness and long-standing pain and that person's unfortunate way of thinking. But that doesn't necessarily change your emotions. It's still what you're feeling. And there's the idea of acceptance again. You can accept that you're experiencing anger at that person who is no longer with you. Not accepting it doesn't make it go away. It only makes it fester. Our negative feelings toward the dead feel impermissible. Suddenly, everyone talks about them like they were uniformly good, or in other words, inhuman, angelic. But that's seldom the complete truth of a human being. Opening and acknowledging all aspects of your feelings and their reality can be a real help. And it's remembering them, not some overly whitewashed version of their real life. So, experiencing the pain of grief, one of the tasks of this process, and that leads us to the third task, adjustment to a world in which someone is missing. But we'll save that for next time. There are other videos on this channel on the psychology of everyday life. Click the subscribe button for more. I also have an online course site, psychologysalon.teachable.com, with programs for professionals and for the general public. And my guide, The Assertiveness Workbook, is available from bookstores and online booksellers. Thanks for watching.